Hello, and welcome to another episode of Ballast Book Launch. I am Andy Symonds, your host and the CEO of Ballast Books and Blue Balloon Books. And today I am honored to have with me Dr. Jeffrey Kuhlman, the author of the forthcoming book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare. Dr. Kuhlman, you have quite an impressive resume. I think I'll actually let you kind of tell the audience a little bit more about your background before we get into the book.
Well, Andy, happy to be here. I heard that you said this was the inaugural studio use. And so for inaugurations, I was privileged to go to 5 presidential inaugurations. President Clinton's second one, then the 2 for President George W. Bush, and 2 for President Barack Obama. The difference was I had to work those, where this hopefully will be more fun than work. And
you just weren't in attendance at those inaugurations. Now, did you have to save anybody at an inauguration?
Unfortunately, we did. On the last one I went to, I'm sorry, the 4th one was President Obama's first inauguration, so January 20, 2009. Right after the inauguration, we went into the rotunda, and there's a tradition I wasn't aware of, but all the senators, they have a dinner, and the congressional leaders, they have a lunch with the president and like his family, the new administration, after kind of the outgoing ones have moved on. Mm-hmm. And about halfway through it, I was standing just outside the door, because the doctor doesn't sit and eat. We stand and hold our equipment and ready to respond. And I heard a Secret Service agent call over the radio, so in my left earpiece, "Doc, where are you? We need you up front." So I raced in there, went to a table, and it was Senator Kennedy. So Senator Kennedy was having a grand mal seizure. So at the time, it wasn't known, but he had a seizure. Took care of him. There were 2 of President Obama's friends that were doctors, and they both said, "Hey, I'm a doctor." And I said, "Great, you can help. I'm a doctor. I have equipment." And so then once
that's why you're there,
right? So then, I became good friends with them, and they're good doctors. But a doctor in attendance is a friend. A doctor with equipment and a plan is kind of what we needed.
Right.
So at the time, got the seizure stopped, and got him over to Washington Hospital Center, which is MedStar, so a great hospital. And that's when later he revealed that he had a brain tumor. So he had the glioblastoma multiforme, and some of the medicine he was taking at the time put the seizure threshold where he had a seizure. Later that day, I was able to. I asked Marvin Nicholson, who was the president's advance person. I said, "Hey, would President Obama like to say a word to Vicki Kennedy, to the spouse?" And they said, "Sure." So I said, he's stable. You can talk to them. So connected them. And then I think that's where the first moment they realized this level of medical care is kind of a little above what we're used to.
Yeah. Wow. So when I asked that question, it was kind of facetious. I didn't actually realize that it had happened. So a great opening. And why don't we explain to the audience why you were working there that day, and what your role was in not just the Obama administration, but in 2 other administrations.
Sure. So I was just kind of in my life, I've been at the right place at the right time. I was in the United States Navy from 1983 to 2013. And in 1997, I was stationed in London, but I got orders to go to HMX-1, which is the President's Helicopter Squadron in Quantico, Virginia. And so the white top helicopters, the VH-3s, the VH-60s, anywhere the President of the United States is in the world, you may not see it, but there's always a white top helicopter in the wings, and they may have a scheduled administrative lift to go from point A to point B, but then they also, if they need an emergency situation, they'll get them out of town and to safety quickly. Like a medical evac would be the most common use of the unscheduled flights. And if you want the classified portion, you have to go to like the movies, watch Independence Day, or or
than you can.
Yeah. But in transforming presidential healthcare, I think there's a whole chapter devoted to the helicopters and the different plans. And fortunately, transforming presidential healthcare was reviewed and authorized by the Department of Defense. So that keeps all of us out of trouble. But then in 2000, I was asked to come up to the White House. So that was the last few months of President Clinton, and then was there through 2013. So for as one of the White House physicians at the White House Medical Unit, and our office and our clinic and our practice is inside the bubble that's taking care of the president, the first family, the vice president, their family, the senior staff, and truly anyone that works or finds themselves as a guest on the 18 acres, not just in DC, but anywhere in the world on the travel.
Yeah, very interesting to hear that that the physicians at the White House are not just responsible for only the president, but also everyone else who works there. And there are some good stories in presidential healthcare about different times you had to treat different people on the White House grounds. And as you mentioned, you obviously have with the presidents, you have physician patient things that you can't divulge, but you do have some funny stories in there about each president. I obviously spent a lot of time with the Clintons, and then with President Bush. It seemed like you spent a lot more time with him. I know you weren't his primary physician, but you spent a lot of time with him. He gave you a neat nickname, which I think anybody who's actually watching this on YouTube might chuckle at, because he called you Leno, and that nickname stuck, and everybody at the White House called you Leno. But tell us a little bit what it was like to work for each of the three presidents, the main presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama. So maybe some anecdotes or interesting stories that you're able to put in your book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare.
Sure. And I'll say that most of the stories are true in Transforming Presidential Healthcare. But you get to figure out which are true and which are based on the facts. But they're all true. They're all factual. So with President Clinton, I was there just at the tail end. I was there for 3 years in the helicopter squadron, and the flight surgeon for HMX would just cover overseas. So we would go like a week ahead. So the very first trip I did was early '98. We went to Cape Town, South Africa.
Right.
And so in Cape Town, the HMX, our helicopters flew alongside the Royal South African Air Force, and the one thing I remember is being on Robben Island in the landing zone during our practice runs. Just landing on the landing zone, there had been a lot of debris that had flown up with the downwash from the rotors. So they pre-positioned me on the island, and just we were kind of anticipating people might need some medical care after you have all these helicopters fly in. So I got to watch Nelson Mandela, Winnie Mandela, even though they were separated at the time. They're the leaders of the country. Mm-hmm. They landed, got out their helicopter. Then I saw, Nighthawk 2, which is the support helicopter, white top, land. And then the last to land is Marine 1, because you want the security detail to be in place first. So President Clinton getting off of Marine 1, along with First Lady Hillary Clinton, and just watching them and the Mandelas walk arm in arm over to a kind of a small bus, sorry, and the bus would take them down the road past the quarry where Nelson Mandela had spent 17 years of his life doing hard labor, and made some lifelong friends there. But then over to the prison cell, and seeing the tight prison cell where Mandiba, he would look out across for 17 years, Table Bay, and see Cape Town grow into the modern city that it was today. And I think Mandela will tell you in his, like, if you've read his autobiography and his biographies, that he'll say, I wasn't the best husband, I wasn't the best father, I could have done a better job. But to me, what makes him a great man was that when he got out of jail, when he got out of his political oppression, and he may have done some things that were unsavory, but when he got out from all of that, instead of leading his country in revenge and retribution, he led them in reconciliation.
Right.
And so that was just a lesson that I never forgotten.
Yeah, that was your first trip.
Yeah, that was the first trip. President. Yeah, and then 16 years later, my very last trip, in the summer of 2013, was with President Obama, and we went through South Africa, stopped at Johannesburg and Pretoria, and Nelson Mandela was basically on his deathbed at that time, and was not able to interact with anyone. But President Obama paid his respects to the family and to the others, and we went down to Cape Town and seen President Obama and the First Lady Michelle Obama. This time I got to be on Marine One, and we landed on the island and got in the same bus and went over to where, past the quarry, actually got out, spent time there with some of Mandela's compadres who spent time at the quarry, went over to the same cell, and there's poignant pictures of President Obama and his wife, his kids, just teaching them the lessons of President Mandela, and looking across, and in a way that led to probably some of the perceptions in the U.S. That allowed President Obama to be the first African American president in the United States, and so those are sort of the bookends of that.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, so with President Clinton, I interacted with him in the Oval Office January of 2021. I was transitioning from I had left HMX, but going up to the White House. And when you are in his presence for a few minutes and he's focused on you, he has a presence about him. And then he also makes you feel like the most important person in the world. And 10 years later, when he interacts with you, he'll remember that conversation. He remembers.
That's a good politician.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a good guy.
Yeah. And it's, but so he has an exceptional brain that he remembers the details of that. So with President Clinton, that's kind of what I remember about him.
Yeah, fascinating. And obviously the first trip, seeing Nelson Mandela in action must have been, actually absolutely riveting. Through all your travels on Air Force One and with all these presidents, though, I mean, you talk about it in the book Transforming Presidential Healthcare. from queens to the Pope. I mean, you met world leaders and the most enigmatic and famous people on the planet, right? Who are some of those people that really stick out to you that you got to meet in your travels with the president as part of his physician team?
Yeah, a lot of times, um, especially during the campaign, there would be um, celebrities around, and um, it's a little bit embarrassing, but half the time I wouldn't know who those celebrities are. And, I would, be nice to them. Sometimes they needed, you know, um, basic medical care. And so I would, happily provide that. Um, and, maybe when I got home from the trip, my kids, my teenagers would say, "Hey, Dad, did you see such and such?" And I'd say, "Oh, is that who that
I
was?"
don't know.
Yeah, and but
I don't know
I
if I saw
yeah,
Jay-Z or not.
yeah, yeah, but we did go to his house once, and that was
Jay-Z's.
yeah, and Beyonce, and they um, so that was interesting. They were personable people, but they were personable with with the Obamas, and so that was part of our job is also to give them the privacy and dignity
Right.
for that. Um,
You're just there in case something happens.
yes,
He
yeah,
chokes
right,
on an oyster, or
right,
who knows. You
yeah,
have all the contingencies covered, though.
yeah, yeah. So the number one thing is out of hospital cardiac arrest. So that's the number one threat to the I would say the life of any 50-year-old
Yeah.
man or woman. Um, if they fall down the stairs and crack their head open, we have a plan for that. If there's but the out of hospital cardiac arrest, we have a defibrillator. We know how to use it. We're within a minute or two. Usually it's less than that. And every minute that you delay defibrillating them, getting them back to that stable rhythm, there's at least an 8% increase in death and mortality. And so we would also have equipment, have a plan, have a second set of hands, a critical care nurse, who he or she would have the rest of the advanced cardiac life support equipment, and kind of all of the plans, the equipment, all of that's laid out in transforming presidential healthcare. But back to the question you asked, because sometimes I wander in my
Oh, that's good.
explanations. So Pope Benedict the 16th, he visited the United States, and he went to the White House. There was a South Lawn uh, reception for him. Usually there's 7 or 9,000. I think on that day where there were 19,000 people. I'd never seen it
Wow.
that full. Um, and so we provide all the medical care for those people. Um, I think it was mid-April. Um, and um, I stayed inside in the doctor's office because we had our teams out on the out on the south lawn, and so after the Pope and President George W. Bush, said some remarks to the people there, and the official greetings. They came inside. I heard them go upstairs to the state floor, which is just one floor above the ground floor, where the doctor's office is, just right inside of diplomatic reception room. And it turns out it was the Pope's birthday. So they sang, I think it was like his 82nd birthday or something. So they sang happy birthday to him. And then I heard the entourage, come down the stairs. They took the elevator, which is just across from the doctor's office door. So from my door. And I try not to, to be in the way. I tried to be out of the way. But President Bush came over to our door, called out the nurse, Cindy Wright, who was the president's nurse, and he knew that she was a devout Catholic, and it was probably the highlight of her life where he
Oh,
introduced her to. Then, he yelled into me, Leno, and so I came out, and um, so I'm lifelong Protestant, and I just don't know that much about Catholicism. Um, but I had heard a piece on NPR that morning that said, the Pope's in town. The Pope is also the head of state for the Holy See. So that's how you, um, that's important, in addition to being, the leader of a billion
Yeah.
Catholic Christians in the world. Um, so I went out, I shook his hand, and um, I said, you know, um, good to see you, Holy Father. Hope you have a productive visit. And I thought it was respectful.
Sounds good.
And, there's pictures of it in Transforming Presidential Healthcare. I showed the picture to my kids, and they tell their friends, who's that old guy with the Pope and the President? And so,
That's their joke.
yeah, that's kind of their joke. But then President Bush and the Pope walked towards uh, it's the tradesman entrance, which then leads you to the Rose Garden past the West Wing, um, over to the Oval Office. And I heard the Pope ask the president, um, "Do you allow non-believers to to work here?" And President Bush just chuckled and he said, "We allow people of all faiths to work here," because he knew that I was a Christian, and just I wasn't
A secular government.
yeah, yeah. I think if you work at the Vatican, of course,
Right.
everyone has to be, sworn allegiance to the
Yeah.
to that. So, but I think that's what makes America great is
Right.
we do respect all religions, or if and beliefs, or if you choose not to have one, that's okay too, and you can be president or work for the president, either one.
Absolutely. So that was during President Bush's administration, and
Yep.
there's a lot of funny stories about you and President Bush in your book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare. One that had me cracking up a few times, that I wanted to ask you about was you talk a lot in the book about the physical fitness of the presidents, how important that is for all of us, right? Especially for middle-aged men like we are, and like most presidents are. You mentioned how President Bush, after his knees started giving out on his run, he was very physically fit, loved to run, but in the second administration, he was doing more mountain biking, and it seemed like he mountain biked almost every day. And you kind of alluded to, it seemed like, to lots of falls that you were constantly patching him up with bruises and abrasions. How many times did President Bush fall on these mountain bike rides?
Um, well, I think he'll tell you that if you're not pushing it and falling or almost falling, you're not doing it right.
So every day. So he
And
wanted to fall once a day.
yes,
Good for
and
him.
or almost.
Good for
And
him.
that was just kind of part of it. And so he's fearless, and whatever he chooses to do, he does it with all his might.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and during the week, he mainly did his fitness routine at the White House, but every weekend, or time that we're traveling, if maybe we're down at the Crawford Ranch, Prairie Chapel Ranch in Crawford, um, or at Camp David, then he would make sure that he gets usually about 18 miles hour and a half, but it's technical single track, and he would lead the peloton. Um, and there'd be times at Camp David where he'd go around the corner and wipe out. And I learned, if I'm riding in the Suburban or in a ATF, um, that I would usually see it, and if he's kind of moving, getting up, I often just leave him alone. And if he's not moving, or I hear the Secret Service, lead say, "Hey, we need you," then I would get out with my equipment and we would go over and assess the damage. But
Let's see if you need
yeah,
stitches or
right,
just a.
yeah. There was one time at the ranch that he did fall, kind of tore up at the back of his calf on his sprocket, and um, I took out some Coban wrap and wrapped it around, and I said, "You're fine. We'll fix it after the ride." So I think he liked that.
He's a Texan. He's a tough
Yeah,
guy.
yeah. I didn't stop the ride, and just after we got back to the house, I said, take a shower and then let me look at it, and just cleaned it up, stitched it, and like a week later, he slowed down a little bit on Air Force One for us to sniff out the stitches. And I don't think any of that breaks the doctor-patient confidentiality, because I think there's pictures out there in the general public about that. Another time, he had a big scrape on his chin, and he was photographed with that walking off Marine One on the South Lawn to his office.
Yeah, hard
So,
hard to hide when you're
yeah,
one of the most photographed men
but
in the
yeah,
world.
yeah. But when he came into office, so that was January of 2001. Um, I think he was about 54 years old,
Hmm.
and um, he would um, he would run every day. So the Secret Service, it's same kind of transition detail. Some of the leaders are the same. The special agent in charge, the DSAC, from the ones that were with him as a candidate knew that he was serious. Some of the others that had transferred over from Clinton,
Yeah, get
were a
their
little,
running shoes on.
yeah, yeah. So they put their running shoes on, and with President Clinton, it's more kind of a jog and a way to meet people, and sometimes end up in photo ops at McDonald's or other food places. But with President Bush, he would do 3 miles, and there were times that he would average um, 6 minute
6 minute miles.
miles,
Yeah, you
and
mentioned that.
so with that, that's kicking butt. And some of the I got to see some of the agents have some exhaustion or throw up or something
Oh,
afterwards.
that's great.
They quickly made the calls out, and they got some of the 20-year-olds who came in
The
that
younger
were,
Secret Service
yeah,
agents.
or elite runners, and so they were able to keep up with them. And he always downplayed the physical fitness because um, unfairly, we just have a strange nation that they would criticize him for. I'd rather have a
Exercising
president
every
with a
day.
punch belly and solve the problems than, sometimes the best thing you can do um, when you're in a leadership position is actually take care of yourself with healthy habits.
Sure.
So eating right, exercising, leading a physically active life.
Yeah.
And um, President Bush was in the top 1% cardiovascular fitness, um, according to,
For his age group.
yeah, for his age group.
Wow.
If you do VO2 max and the aerobic conditioning, and he kind of woke up on his 40th birthday, where, um,
Hungover.
and he, his wife Laura said, you need to straighten up, and he also was more serious in his spiritual journey at that time, and so he made the decision to not
Quit
drink
drinking.
after that time, and that's in his autobiography.
Right.
And just as important was, he became a Ken Cooper disciple.
Aerobics.
So Ken Cooper is the father of aerobics, and for the next decade, um, he would go to the Cooper Institute in Dallas and get his physical and do all the annual running. We made sure to involve Dr. Cooper in the presidential physical that President Bush would get every August. So he would get to see his numbers and see that he's maintaining his fitness. So,
Good.
there's other presidents that they claim they're the healthiest president in history, or they may live to be 200, or they have superior genetics. But President Bush actually, factually, his numbers were in the top 1% cardiovascular fitness, and he maintained that through age 62 when he left
Left office.
office. And then, now he's he's 78. He's younger than former President Trump and President Biden, but he leads a physically active life
Still.
with today clearing brush, riding his mountain bike every day, um, often with wounded warriors, and also he's shifted his brain also to uh, paint, and
Oh,
so he kind of
paints.
followed Winston Churchill and other leaders that have.
Not his drinking habits, though.
Oh,
Winston
correct.
Churchill's drinking
Yes,
habits.
yes, yeah. So I think we can learn a lot from actually the presidents. With President Clinton, we can learn to progress to a plant-based life. With President Bush, we learn to live a daily physical activity, and then with President Obama to be temperate in our personal habits.
And he quit smoking when you were his physician upon your recommendation or your urging. Is that right?
Well, an individual who does that should get all the credit. So I would be honored to be part of. What I actually did is he came into office in January of
2009.
2009, and we had a few brief interactions, and I remember one of them, him saying, I'm pretty healthy, I'm a good weight, I eat arugula, I like salmon, I like kale, um, I exercise every day, and um, so don't ever don't ever bother me about other things, which he's talking about the smoking. And I made sure there was nobody else around because my job is not to embarrass him or upstage him. And I did make the comment, you have fame, you have fortune, you have a wife that'll talk to you, you have kids that love you. You got to be careful because you may not be around in a few years. Um, and really, for health habits, none of the rest of that matters.
Mhm.
So I think that, but I never said anything about it. A year later, we did have the presidential physical, where in it I said, continue, keep up your smoking cessation. Um, and he would tell people that he's 95% cured, which we know that means that you're not.
Still smoking.
Yeah. And then December of that first year, I did write him a briefing book. Um, and in it, there was some publications, medical publications that had come out recently that it takes usually about 8 times as the average to quit smoking. Um, so the point is, and even with other patients that I've had, if you've tried once or twice, don't give up.
Yeah.
You got to keep.
Takes a while to take.
Yep, and you got to go 90 days. Even if you cheat during that 90 days, to lower that rate of recidivism. And here's the different options. So there's cold turkey, there's hypnosis,
Nicorette, which you said he enjoyed the Nicorette.
Yeah, there's Nicorette, gum sprays, um, all kinds of choices. There were medication at the time that had been recently approved. So just here are the options, and just standing by. There's always time for a New Year's resolution, and just like present the facts. So, anytime I gave him information to read, I found that he read it all. He was known for consuming the briefing books, and just he's not going to sit and talk to you an hour about colonoscopy prep.
But he's going to do his research.
But he's going to do it. Yeah, he's going to do his research. So then there was a time that I made sure that those around him that did that.
His smoking buddy. You got
Yeah,
a
his
smoking
smoking
buddy.
buddy. Yeah, so smoking buddy stopped smoking, and so I think that got his attention. If somebody else can do it,
Yeah.
then
And he didn't want to
can.
go stand in the
Right.
cold by himself.
Right. And then said, well, I'll it's a stressful job when we pass Obamacare, then I will. And I said, great, that'll be, the best health gift you can, give yourself. So I think it passed like March 23. I sent him up the sticky note that says, okay,
Last cigarette.
yep. And so then he did pick a day, April 1, which I thought was interesting, April
April
Fool's
Fools.
Day. But um, he was serious. And then, to my knowledge, the next 3 years that I was around, I never ever saw any indications whatsoever that
Good.
he cheated on that. And again, I think it's okay as a leader to be vulnerable and to be human, but um, it's just, I think it's a wonderful gift he gave himself. He gave his wife, his kids,
Yeah.
and that there's lessons to learn from temper it in your personal habits
Yeah. So
throughout life.
he obviously had a lot of trust in you to take that, to listen to your advice, take the advice, and you obviously had to have that special relationship with him to be able to have that talk. So with President Obama, you were his primary physician. You were the main one. Can you tell us
Yep.
about how he selected you? And you do write about it a
Yep.
little bit in Transforming Presidential Healthcare, but talk about that conversation and how Obama pegged you to be his doctor.
Yeah. Um, there's probably kind of a longer story with that. So if we go
We
back,
got time.
yeah. So if we go back to the beginning of time, so in 1776,
Okay.
we have a nation that's forming, and then a few years later, um, General Washington becomes president,
Vice President. Yeah.
and so he brings his personal physician, uh, Colonel Craik, along, who had been his regimental surgeon, and he served. So on day one of the president in the United States, they always relied upon a physician for their personal needs. Um, so back then there may have been some bloodletting, there may have been some other
Yeah. Treatments that we're no longer doing.
right. Yes, we do bloodletting now, and that's in a different book that I talked about, transformative healthcare, and that one's interesting because it has to do with leeches, but kind of how they were on the right path, but they got it wrong.
Right. Okay.
So the first 100 years of of our country, often the physician that cared for the president happened to also be the Surgeon General of the Army or the Surgeon General of the Navy. They're in D.C. They would just come over and take care of the president once in a while when they needed something.
Mm-hmm.
So there was never a full-time doctor at the White House until the turn of the dawn of the 20th century. So the dawn of the 20th century um, was McKinley. So President McKinley, his wife was an invalid that had uh, epilepsy, and with that, he had a famous trip up to Buffalo. And then when he was up in Buffalo, the doctor that he had at the time, Presley Rixey, wasn't with the president, but was with Mrs. McKinley, taking care of her. And unfortunately,
He got shot, right?
President McKinley got shot a couple times in his body, in his thorax, and um, probably what killed him is not the assassin's bullets, but it's probably
Infection.
the medical care of at the time. The conventional wisdom was dig in there, pull out the bullets, but by doing that, they didn't use sterile techniques, and he died later from sepsis from the overwhelming infection. So Teddy Roosevelt became president, I think the youngest to take office, but it was by succession, not by election. And um, he said, we're going to have the doctor full time assigned to the White House. So Dr. Rixey became the first White House physician. And before that, they didn't call it the White House. They called it the Executive Mansion or the People's House.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just wasn't coined the White House until like 1901. Then, they built the West Wing, because before that, the offices were in the kind of in the Executive Mansion. And then during World War II, the East Wing was built and covered up the bunker that's there. And the old executive office building was built just west across West Exec, and it was one of the biggest office buildings in America at the time when it was built just after the Civil War, and that housed the Department of War, Department of State, and Department of Navy. Those were kind of the executive branches at the time. So to this day, there's military doctors that they get nominated by their service, Army, Navy, Air Force Surgeon Generals. Here's the criteria that the White House asked for, and in the past, since the past 20 years or so, there's been 2 Army, 2 Navy, 2 Air Force, and then out of those 6, the president can either pick one of them or can say, I want to bring in
Personal physician.
a doctor to leave their private practice and come and be my personal physician. So most presidents, when they get elected, they know thousands of doctors, but that's from donors and friends and specialty thing. And you don't necessarily want your best friend to be your personal physician. Right. You want to have a physician that is current clinical competence, that knows the system, and that doesn't do politics, doesn't do policy, but will give you trusted medical advice.
And that's your mantra, right?
Yeah.
No politics.
No policy, no politics, just trusted medical advice. Right. So,
like they said to the ER doctors at GW when President Reagan was shot, he jokingly said to them, you tell the story in the book, he jokingly said to them, I hope you guys are Republicans. And they said, Mr. President, we're all Republicans today.
Yeah.
They just wanted to treat him. It doesn't matter his politics.
Yep.
And that's the way you looked at it.
Yep. So, so kind of in the first couple months. So at the time I was of President Obama's first term, I was the director of the White House Medical Unit as the senior person. And, a couple months into it, he said, I don't really need a doctor, but, Michelle and the girls do. So I want to go with you. So
that informal.
Yes. But I took that as probably the highest compliment that a man or a president can give you is take care. Yeah, I trust you to take care of my family.
Absolutely.
And obviously, if you're flying around on Air Force One and everywhere I look, I can't get away from you, and you have medical equipment, and you kind of leave me alone, but you're there when I need you for that trusted medical care or trusted medical advice, then that's kind of the job of the physician to the president.
Yeah, very, very interesting. So let's pivot, if we can, now to the book is called Transforming Presidential Healthcare. So there's, as the title indicates, there have been transformations, just like everything. It's constantly evolving. I know you implemented a lot of changes as when you were in the White House. The book is obviously very timely right now, and in fact, it's so timely that the news cycle has changed since the book was written. Right?
Yep.
We were talking a lot initially about Biden and cognitive decline, and now we're talking about Trump and possible cognitive decline, and the 25th Amendment, which nobody was really thinking about maybe prior to a year ago, is certainly a hot button issue in the news. You do talk in the book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare, a lot about the 25th Amendment, and I think that's something that again has been overlooked for so long. Can you talk a little bit about the 25th Amendment, and a doctor's role in if that would ever have to be invoked?
Sure. So I'll just give the disclaimer that I'm not a constitutional lawyer or historian, um, but I've at least thought about it and gone through the exercises and the tabletops
Sure.
for a few years. Unfortunately, in our nation's history, um, we've had 4 assassinations of sitting presidents. So President Lincoln, we talked about President McKinley, President Garfield and McKinley, both similar story of probably died from the poor medical care they got, which was sort of consistent with the time.
Right.
And then with President Kennedy, Kennedy and Lincoln, I don't think either would have survived with the devastating blow to the head.
Headshots, yeah.
And they died within minutes or hours with President Lincoln's case overnight. And even if it was at the best trauma center in the world on the table, it'd be really tough to save them.
Right.
We've also had other presidents who've died in office, sometimes from medical conditions that maybe not were managed the most appropriate. And all of that is laid out in Transforming Presidential Healthcare. So after President Kennedy's assassination, November 22 of 1963, Senator Birch Bayh was one of the Senate leaders from Indiana. And there's always, since the beginning of our democracy, our country, there's been kind of questions about presidential succession.
Mm-hmm.
Even when the first president to die in office, the vice president became president. The first paper they gave him to sign said acting president. He crossed through the title acting.
Oh, interesting.
So that's that's part of the tales in the Transforming Presidential Healthcare book. So the 25th Amendment was written out in 4 different sections, and it has to be passed by each state has to ratify it, and I think you have to have 2/3 majority
for an amendment to become
right for
right,
the amendment,
yep. Which it became
which
law
it
in
did
the 60s, right?
Yeah, so a couple years later,
right,
it became the law of the land, and the only way to remove a president from office is if they die. We've had that happen.
Mm-hmm.
If they resign, we had that happen 50 years ago last month. Or if they're impeached, which is back Article 2 of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
We've had several of those impeachments happen, but nobody that's been ultimately removed. And then the fourth way
that's the one
is
that's
the
so interesting.
the
Right now.
25th Amendment. So the 25th Amendment, if we go to Section 2, Section 2 is and maybe I'll pause a second for a joke. So there's a joke in the White House of what do you do if the vice president dies? And the answer is you get another one. So that's and this was 20, 30 years ago joke. So don't think of anything current. It's no political statement.
Sure.
So so the Section 2 of the 25th Amendment is if the vice president's no longer in office for whatever reason, then there's a successor that gets named that Congress approves that.
Okay.
So we had that happen with Spiro Agnew, and so Gerald Ford was the the Speaker of the House, the majority leader for the Republican Party in Congress, and so that they used the 25th Amendment, the Section 2, to replace him.
Okay.
So then fast forward a few months, and the president resigns. So President Nixon resigns. So Section 1 says if the president's no longer president, then the vice president becomes president.
Mm-hmm.
So it got used again. So those are have already stood the test of time, and nobody challenged those. So but that's both of those are pretty obvious things that they've left office. So then Section 3 is if the president voluntarily says, I'm giving up the powers of the office, then the vice president becomes the acting president.
Mm-hmm.
And it says
pretty straightforward.
It says how to do it. You're supposed to do it in writing, and you send it to the leaders of Congress, and there's an office over there that it goes to. And then it also says that he or she can take back the powers, if you execute that same process. So there's been arguments in history. What I've read is when President Reagan was shot, it wasn't executed at that time. When he later went under surgery for his colon cancer, he also didn't execute it. And then George H.W. Bush had some medical stuff, and he didn't execute it. So I know for sure that June of 2002, President George W. Bush was having a scheduled colonoscopy, and we had planned it for Camp David. We knew he was going to be knocked out for it because he had a history of polyps.
I think groggy when you come out of it. You don't make any big decisions.
Yep.
So anesthesia.
So with that, we were flying back from the G8 summit in Kananaskis, Canada, and on Air Force One, I kind of gave him the brief about here's the worst thing about a colonoscopy is not the procedure, it's the prep.
Yeah.
And so here's the prep, and then he asked who the doctor was, and I said, oh, that's Dr. Butler, and who was just a super gastroenterologist at Bethesda at the time, Naval Hospital Bethesda. And he says, ooh, is Dr. Butler a rear admiral? And cheekily, and I said, well,
Butler, rear admiral. A lot of jokes there.
Yeah, so I said, if you'd like to promote him, he can be, but he is a Navy captain. So the next day at Camp David, we did do the colonoscopy. And again, this is 2002. The common practice in the U.S. is they give you a narcotic, they give you a sedative, so like Versed and Demerol is the common, and then they say don't make any decisions, don't drive a car or heavy machinery for the rest of the day. So that's just not acceptable for the President of the United States. So we actually used propofol, and so propofol is it's now the standard of care, but it was at the time kind of cutting edge. It's that milk of amnesia where you do a few drops by IV infusion. Michael Jackson. But we did it separately where we had an anesthesiologist. We actually had two of them that were there in the room with him with a critical care nurse. We used a heart monitor. So none of those things were what Michael Jackson's doctor chose to use.
Did it in his living room every night.
Yeah. So and took phone calls from people. So with which also points out that those that you think get the best care often don't. So that's why I say this isn't VIP care; it's private and secure care that fits into their schedule. But we don't cut corners. So the chairman of anesthesiology at the time at Bethesda said, oh, I'm going to be the doctor to do the anesthesia. We always use Versed and Demerol, and I'm the one that makes that decision. So myself, the lead doctor at the time, we knew better. And so I called the the president of the American Academy of Anesthesiologists, American Society of Anesthesiologists, and said, what's the literature showed? Will you back us up? Will you be available if, people question it?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, absolutely. So, so we did, uh, President Bush did sign the papers on a corpsman's desk in a eucalyptus, which is the medical cabin up at Camp David. And then, the procedure takes 20 minutes. You snip out a couple polyps, you turn the propofol off, and we had calculated out how many half-lives. And, mentally he's sound right afterwards, but he and Josh Bolton, which was the deputy chief staff at the time, and Barney, they all went on a walk for an hour or two, took some pictures, and then he took back over the duties, signed a piece of paper. We'd kind of asked, and they said, "Oh yeah, we faxed it to the Capitol." And at this time, I mean, I can't even buy a house, close on a house with the faxed signatures. So they said, "Oh yeah, we actually took a driver and we sent it to the Capitol in addition." So that's, to me, the first, dotted your T's, dotted your I's, sorry, dotted your I's, crossed your T's, the first official use. And it's good practice for in the future. Fast forward a few years, President Obama was going to get his first physical as president at Walter Reed. And at the time, the recommendation was 50 years old to get a screening colonoscopy, or 45 if you're African American. And he kind of made the joke, I'm halfway in between. And so he was 47, 48. And so we did it at that time, which is appropriate. And he got the virtual colonoscopy
So he didn't have
done.
to transfer.
And then, but 1 in 20 virtual colonoscopies have an unexpected polyp in it. And so the best way is you're prepped. Then you just go right next door to the GI lab. And we had a gastroenterologist. So Dr. Brooks Cash was standing by, superstar, and ready to remove it. But it came back clean. And so we had it, double red on site. Then he's done. It takes a minute or two to do the CAT scan. And so we had practiced in the situation room, gone through the exercise, but did not need to get that. So that's section 3. It's interesting. There's nothing in section 3 or any of the amendment that mentions a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So or medical expert. But it just would seem common sense that, hey, I'm providing.
I'm going to have input on that,
right?
If the president can actually perform his duties or not.
Yeah. So then section 4 has to do with involuntary.
Right.
So the involuntary, and there's, again, there's a Hollywood movie, I think it's Dave, starring Kevin Kline, and so, the real president goes into a coma, probably a stroke, if I remember my movies correctly from 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you kind of find that doppelganger, that body double, which is then Dave got, put in, and he's a, better president, better husband, better everything. And so that's sort of, they did not invoke Section 4 of the 25th Amendment. But that's, to me, what's it's intended is if, somebody has trauma that it's obvious that they can't continue their duties as president, whether it's months or years, or whether they have a catastrophic stroke, or whether they have, a devastating, brain tumor, that just their mental capacities are not in place. Then that procedure is laid out, and it is the vice president, along with the heads of the executive departments, which many scholars believe is the cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be a simple majority. And then there is an option that if Congress forms a body that's equivalent to that, that would be the alternative. And then that is involuntarily where they take it away and they give it to the vice president, who then is acting as president. Um, so that is, to me, I don't think that is easily invoked. I think if somebody has, um, I think we should be very careful not going against the will of the people. I think, you know, um, that's what elections are for. As we speak today, there's a 78-year-old former president, and you can see his mental abilities on debates and campaign trail, and there's plenty of information that you have. We have a 59-year-old vice president, and I think you can see how her brain works, and you have enough information. So if you need to, so I think the public has more information about candidates than we ever have in history.
Right. Yeah, and it's fortunate. Obviously, there was a lot of talk after the prior debate with President Biden about the 25th Amendment and if there were anybody was going to invoke. And it's fortunate that we have never had to do it. Hopefully, we never do have to do it. I did want to cover one more topic before, because today is September 11th, obviously the anniversary of the terrorist attacks in 2001. And you were at the White House in 2001. So you tell the story in your book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare. But you just want to briefly talk about that day and what it was like being at the White House. Obviously, the president, I think most of us know, he was in Florida at an elementary school, I believe. So you weren't with President Bush on September 11th, but you were at the White House. And it played a role at least in securing the White House and what went on at the Pentagon. So could you talk a little bit about that day?
Sure. Yeah. So at the dawn of this millennium, President Bush took office. He certainly had compassionate conservatism and education at the top of his priority list. Mm-hmm. We had spent a month at the ranch during the congressional recess, August down at Prairie Chapel Ranch. September 11th, President Bush was down in Florida, and that morning at an elementary school, observing kids in a reading class. Mm-hmm. The First Lady was on Capitol Hill with Senator Kennedy, and they were introducing bipartisan legislation, education related, and Vice President Cheney was in his office in the West Wing. I was one of the junior White House physicians at the time, so I was the doctor in the clinic that day. So we have a clinic in the old executive office building. Back then, it was room 105, and it was the clinic opened at 9:00, but a few minutes before that, I was over in the West Wing getting a coffee and a cranberry muffin at the White House mess. So the mess is situated right next to the Situation Room, and there's always a Uniform Division Secret Service officer sitting outside of the Situation Room. So that day it was Scott. I had just taken care of Scott for some non-cardiac chest pain a few days before, and what I remember is all of our SkyTel pagers back in those days is what we all had. Yeah. They all went off at the same time, and it said a small plane hits World Trade Center. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, must be a bad weather day. Yeah. So I got that, walked across West Exec into the clinic. We had a TV in there, and just in the TV, they're showing the World Trade Center, and it's a crystal clear day. So then it's like, okay, this isn't making sense. And that's when you see the second airliner live on TV crash into the other tower. Um, so I kind of, just responded and said, "We're not having clinic today." And so I walked out, and our ops room for the medical unit was on the fifth floor. So ran up to the fifth floor and looked out. Heard on the radio, helicopter crashes at Acrobat, which is the Pentagon's. That's the code name for the landing zone, the helicopter landing zone at the Pentagon. And so when I looked out that window and you see smoke pouring up from the Pentagon, even at that time, then I just ran down to the ground floor.
And you knew it wasn't a helicopter.
I knew it
too
wasn't
much smoke
yeah,
for a helicopter.
or at least I probably didn't know, but it just seemed something catastrophic is going on.
Yeah.
And so I ran across the front of the White House. So that's past the tradesman entrance. There's kind of some moat-looking things, and I remember all the Secret Service uniform division. They were out with their long guns, and they had armor, had long guns, and I held up my blue badge.
And they were evacuating the White House, right? Because there were reports that planes were headed to the White House.
Right,
and in fact, Flight 93 that crashed in Pennsylvania well may have been headed for the White House.
Yes, yeah. So they were, so they had evacuated the White House just at that moment, and I actually ran and went through the Red Gate and got into the Marilyn Monroe Tunnel and went to the POC, the Presidential Emergency Operations Center, which is the bunker under the East Wing. And I got in right before the vice president. They had kind of lifted him up and hustled him over into the bunker. So he was there that day. And so I spent the day in the East Wing bunker. One of the airlift ops guys that I had worked with at Marine One, at HMX One, who was one of the pilots there. His name is Darling, so Robert Darling. He actually's written a just incredible book about 24 hours inside of the bunker. Oh, wow. And but so I was there all day, and provided some basic medical assistance to things that they that came up. Hey, I need a naproxen or some other medical thing. Those that handful that was in the bunker, I did give them all a 3-pack of Cipro, and some of them kind of looked at me funny, and then once you explain, it's just what terrorists do, is they do the big spectacular thing, but then they will subtly.
That was to protect against anthrax.
Yeah, right. And so then a month later, when it hit the Pentagon, not the Pentagon, the Capitol building, sorry, that then it looked like geniuses.
Yeah.
So until we had the air quality testing that said there's no anthrax, and we kind of figured out that was all that's going on, then you stop the Cipro. But
so you had a front row seat though to Vice President Cheney and everything that was going on that day, and all the conversations and the decisions that were being made in that bunker.
Yep. And there was some, like anything else, there's some communication issues between Air Force One and the bunker that have since been rectified, and they made decisions that were important. The President Bush, when he came back after they kind of routed him to Offutt and up to Barksdale and then Offutt and then back to D.C., came into the bunker and, planes, trains, automobiles, let's get this country rolling again. And there's thousands of American lives lost that are on that day. There were tens of thousands of men and women that, um, did what they could to uh, for rescuing.
Hmm.
Um, and um, it's always challenging to figure out the health effects from all of that.
Right.
And then with the our country's longest war with Afghanistan, and then with Iraq, all of that kind of rolls out from that
A lot of
sentinel there.
reverberations from that day
Yeah,
still being felt
yeah,
every single, today, 23 years later,
yeah. So
23
then,
years old today.
10 years later, I hadn't moved far. I was still doing the same job, this time with President Obama. And um, so September 2011, and we went up to New York City. And in New York City, every year, they commemorate, they read the names.
Hmm.
And by then, there's the 9/11 memorial, the World Trade Center, the footprints of where they were. And President Bush, his motorcade, came up. Former President Bush at the time, he got out, and just everyone's kind of looked at him, and instead of him walking over to greet the Obamas, he came over to me and said, "Wow, what are you still doing here?" And kind of opened up my jacket and just made fun of me a little bit, which is good. Um, and then he and the first lady, um, Laura Bush, along with the Obamas, they went over and paid their tribute. But this kind of was just behind the scenes. But luckily, if you're red or blue, um, their body's the same inside,
Yeah.
and so I was able to provide care to
That
both parties.
was your mantra. That's great. Well, I know we're coming up on time. Is there anything that you like readers to know before they pick up their copy of Transforming Presidential Healthcare? What was your goal for the book? And at Ballast Books, you've
Yeah,
now done a couple books with us, right? That's what we start with. Is what are your goals for the book?
yeah.
What were your goals? What do you want people to get out of this?
Um, well, I would say in the past decade, since leaving the White House, I finished up my 30-year military career. Um, just as important is just knowing when it's the right time to leave, and hopefully you leave at a better place, and
Mhm.
others can follow and provide the care. Um, there's always people that want to talk about the negative things about some of the healthcare that's been involved for the presidents, or some of the negative aspects of the Secret Service where they could have done their job better. But um, I had the honor and privilege of a lifetime to work inside of the bubble from 1997 to 2013. Um, every day on the White House 18 acres, um, there's probably 7,000 people that have a badge. There's a third that are military, but it's the military support people. It's a third that are the Secret Service, and it's a third that are staffers. And they're usually new to this. They were part of the campaign, and they're doing kind of the best that they can for the American people. Um, so the White House Medical Unit, um, the changes that we've made um, over the past generation, that permanent change has been bringing the combat field medical care into the 21st century. We learned a lot from Afghanistan and Iraq, unfortunately, with um, our military members being injured on the battlefield. The survival rate is the highest in history, and that's with the concepts of care under fire, which are laid out in Transforming Presidential Healthcare. Um, the second part is um, asymmetrical threats. So we have a historic chemical, biologic, radiological attacks and threats um, that we have to be prepared for at all times. Um, the other part is what I would call whole person care. So not just basic medical care, but treating the president, those around them,
Mind, body, spirit.
as mind, body, spirit, and um, also not doing kind of hokey things that are out there, but um, there are lifestyle things with physical activity, with keeping a good weight, with keeping gratitude, a positive mindset. All of those things are important for whole person care, and getting the appropriate specialist that won't do too much. They'll do what's appropriate, and then also getting primary care doctors to do everything they're trained to do, and not, again, not take corners. And then um, just some of the some of the lives that are saved are we've had encephalitis of a Secret Service member in the Middle East on a trip. We've had sepsis of a White House Communications Agency officer in Ghana, um, and unfortunately at the Beijing Olympics, we had an attack of family members, and one was fatal, and the other one survived, and it's because the plan that we had set up for the president. And the other thing is there's hundreds of lives saved, thousands of people taken care of, and doing it all as just part of our oath, part of our job, and doing it without um, making the nightly news. So to me, that's the incredible part of transforming presidential healthcare.
That's great. Well, those are the themes of the book, with a lot of great stories, tales, anecdotes. Pick up the book, Transforming Presidential Healthcare, everywhere the books are sold. Dr. Kuhlman is making signed copies available at Ballast Books bookstore, www.ballastbooks.com, and just go to the bookstore and you can pick up a signed copy of Transforming Presidential Healthcare there. Dr. Kuhlman, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here.